I don't know if I can make an update video every week, but I'll try to do it as often as I can. And if you guys enjoy them, I really appreciate you watching. So, what have I been reading? I have finished The Legend of Tall, Book One, A King's Bargain. And what this book is about, in case you don't know about this series, it's about a man named Tal Harrenfell. And Tal is kind of like a legend in this world. It's a very classic fantasy world, and people, his name is renowned across all across it for all of these various deeds that he's done in the past. And now he's an older guy. He's like in his 40s, I think, and he's retired. Think of it as a retired old guy, and he just wants to leave the past behind. And he's gone off to live in this village called Hunt Hollow, and he's a chicken farmer there. And then there's a boy named Garen, who's I think the youngest son of this farming family, and he's lived in Hunt Hollow all his life. And Garen is bored because obviously there's nothing to do in his little village, and he goes and hangs out with Tal, and Tal goes by the name of Bran. And they just become friends over a few years that Tal has been there, until one day this mage called Aelin shows up, and Aelin is like, "Listen, I know who you are, and the king needs you, so you're coming with me." And it basically goes from there. Like Tal brings Garen along with him. They go to the capital city, and the king asks Tal to do something for him, specifically to find a trader in the area. And like we get this slow introduction to the magic and the history of this world, while also starting to get to know these characters. And this really is a story about a man who has retired from his exploits, and his mentee, I guess, because he ends up basically teaching Garen about life and a lot of other things. So very, very classic fantasy. And I think I really found that I mentioned this in my last video, but my favorite thing about this story is just the way it's written. I think J.D.L. Russell is very talented, and he uses his prose really well to invoke that sense of classic fantasy. Like if you're reading a classic fantasy book, you really, at least I really need that specific prose style. And then everything else about the story was just so fun and nostalgic in that classic way. Like it brought me back to a younger self when things were a little bit simpler, and it was just a classic story, and I really enjoyed it. I think Tal is such a interesting character, and I want to know more about him because he's shrouded in mystery. He's always mentioning, you're always getting hints at how like a lot of these past deeds that he's done, like he doesn't feel heroic about them, and he's carrying some trauma from them, and I want to know more about that. Like that's what's kept me the most intrigued. And then Garen, who's like his mentee. I mean, Garen is also in a very classic way just an idiot, right? Like he's not very smart and he does stupid things. And yeah, I mean, if he wasn't that way, I would almost be disappointed. But I think this story does lean into some tropes, but not in a bad way. I think, if you're in the mood for something like this, then this is a great, great one to pick up. And I did immersion read it. I started off just on audio, but I found that the prose was too rich that I wanted to look at it with my eyes and really soak it in. And I think immersion reading was a great call. The audio is done very well, and yeah, I highly recommend this. I'm looking forward to book two. I think these books are quite short, so in terms of audio length, they're like 10, 11 hours each. I'm not sure how many pages that translates to because I was doing it on my ebook reader, and maybe like 300 pages I think about each. And yeah, I'm really excited to continue in this series at some point. So, having finished Legend of Tal, I was also listening to The Gates of Fire. So, if you don't know what this story is about, this is historical fiction, specifically about the Battle of Thermopylae. And I was kind of hesitant about this because, I am a big history fan, but specifically, I'm a big fan of Achaemenid Persian history. I feel like insofar as just history is concerned, there's been this shadow cast on the Achaemenid Persians because of their wars with the Greeks and how influential the Greeks have been in Western culture. But actually, the Persians were probably one of the most fascinating empires ever. Like they were of their time specifically, they were probably one of the most progressive empires. And then, some of the dramas and histories within the stories, and just generally their culture was just really, really fascinating. So Thermopylae, I think most people know about this. This is the Battle of the 300. If you've seen the movie 300, obviously in reality it was more than 300 Spartans. There were 300 Spartans, but then thousands of other Greeks along with them at Thermopylae. And I think that this story was more historically accurate. I'm not 100% sure about the historical accuracy of it, but I do think that he did a pretty good job, at least much better than any other interpretation that I personally seen of this battle. So what I will talk about the story is we're following a tale from a man named Xiones, and Xiones was captured after the battle, let's say. So then now the Persian king wants to hear the story of these Spartans from Xiones, and so Xiones starts recounting this tale. It's kind of like a chronicling tale, told largely in first person, and he talks a lot about his own life and then how he met the Spartans and then the specific Spartans that he served under. He was a squire to one of their great leaders, and essentially it just that's how the story is told. It's got this really rich writing style which invokes that sense of legend and myth that I really enjoyed. I think that was one of my favorite parts about this. Is if um, it's kind of similar to a lot of Greek myth retellings where you just have that just that classic archaic style. It's written. I really like the way this book was written. I will say I don't think it's very character driven. So that's why for the first 70% of the book or so, I struggled quite a bit because I just wasn't latching on to Xiones, who was our POV character, or any of the other characters. It just there wasn't much there to latch onto. You know, he's just it's like a narrative style is a little bit too distant for that. However, towards the last 30%, I found myself very invested in this book. And it wasn't because I was specifically latched onto a character, which I usually need if I'm going into like a big battle scene or something. Like any action scene just goes right over my head unless I care about the specific characters. But in this case, you know, we're talking like just this incredible writing of the battle at Thermopylae, like the actual battle itself, and this different stages that it went through. And I found myself really invested, not because of any particular character, but because of just the concept of it, you know, because I just started thinking about like the valor and the bravery. You know, Thermopylae is it really is a tale of extreme courage in the face of insurmountable odds. And you know, like whether or not the historical accuracy of whatever version of the story we listen to is accurate or not, it almost doesn't matter because we're just talking about a story, and that story is really moving because then you know you think about these people who they went into the hot gates, like the gates of fire, literally, like knowing they were going to die because there was this existential threat to their families just on the other side of the ocean, and these people are like, we're going to hold them off at those gates while the rest of our allies can gather and get ready and make a bigger battle. And then that's how you had Salamis and the battles that came afterwards, which defeated the Persians. But Thermopylae is just it's this tale of incredible valor. And by the end of the book, like I was teary eyed because I was just thinking of that. And you know, it adds extra depth when there's at least some degree of truth to it, right? So Gates of Fire, I recommend it if you're looking for historical fiction of that sort. Like understanding that this might not be very character driven in case that's what you want, but it's an extremely well written book, which I think is pretty well researched, and it's very enticing as well. And the battle scenes are just incredible. So if you like that, I definitely recommend it. So those are the books that I have finished, and now I will talk a little bit about what I am currently reading. So somewhat impulsively, I picked up Spark of the Divine. This is an indie fantasy book that is very D&D focused. It just feels like a very D&D story. It's about a crew of people in a very D&D world that, you know, they just get caught up in misadventures and some bad things are happening in this world, and these guys are it's a mercenary crew, and they're basically getting caught up in trying to fix some pretty big issues. And I'm finding this story, if I was 100% honest, it's a little bit rough around the edges insofar as writing is concerned. However, it is a lot of fun, and I think I've been having a lot of fun just reading it because you know the plot is it's quite fast paced, but there's a lot of those slower moments where you can just kind of sit together with the characters, and then the story itself is very relationship based. It's very much about this crew and their relationships with each other. So those are the parts of it that I'm really enjoying. I'm about 40% through it, so I'll keep you guys updated as I go along. So far, it's a fun story, and I'm liking it. The other book that I've been listening to is Sunder. And Sunder is a book about this lady named Karis. Karis, I don't exactly remember how to say her name, but she is in this world what you call a death speaker. So when she was younger, at some point, she made this pact with this demon, eldritch horror creature thing, where essentially when someone dies, she can talk to them for a little bit after their death. So that's what it means by death speaker. And her job is, like people who are investigating deaths or they want to know what happened. Like if they just there's a bunch of bodies on the beach and they want to know what happened here, she can go there, and she's paid to do this and just talk to the people who died, and like get their stories, and she can help piece together those pictures. Now, Karis, at the very beginning of this story, she gets caught up in a bad job. She goes to do this job, but bad stuff is happening, and there's these creatures, and it's all bad. And in that process, she ends up somehow shadow binding some other dude, some person to her shadow, and now she can't escape him. So that's essentially the very start of the story, and we go from there. I'm only about 25% in, so we're getting through it. So far, what I have to say about this book is that I'm really, really enjoying it. This is really damn good. Like right from the start, I found that this book is very well balanced. The writing is excellent. Karis is such a compelling point of view character. She's awesome. She's very snarky. She's a no BS kind of person, kind of lady, and she has this attitude of like, I don't know what's gonna happen, but let's just do it and we'll figure it out later. And that's already gotten her into trouble, right? So so I'm very curious where this is gonna go. The pacing has been excellent so far. The plot is very interesting. The world is fascinating. I've been kind of surprised with how much time has been spent on the world building. It's just the atmosphere is very dark and like gloomy, but at the same time it's a very somewhat technologically advanced world. Like we talk about the characters have timepieces, they're talking about modern units of time, and at the same time there's these like Frankenstein like creatures which transport them around. So I'm really curious about what's going on with the world. The magic, I think I'm finally starting to get a grasp on it, but it's very much like you're just dumped in, and like there's not much in the way of info dumps and stuff in this book, which has been really good so far. So far, really, really good. I'm getting hints. I'm getting the early hints of a romance, and I don't know for sure if there is going to. If like I don't know how far this romance will go, or if there even is a romance, or if I'm just delusional. If it does end up going down that road of becoming a more like having a romantic plot, then I think the way that romance is executed is probably what's going to dictate my enjoyment of this book. I think if it becomes the central focus of the story, then it might lose some favor in my eyes. But if it's like slow burn and more of a secondary plot that adds depth to the characterization of the main characters, then I think it could be really, really good. So far, Sunder is excellent. I cannot wait to continue it. And that's my update. Like I really appreciate if you did watch this far. Thanks so much, and you guys have a great day. Happy reading.